It drove like a drunk driver. Yeah, this is not Eric Peters' assessment of the Tesla Smart Summons feature. This is Consumer Reports. They actually did their own testing. You know, as soon as Tesla pushed that update out over the air to their cars, and that happened while I was on vacation, people were posting on social media all these different pictures of their own tests in public areas. You know, it's a great feature. You know, you just tell your car, oops, oh, it just pulled right out in front of that car. Oh, wow, it just hit the garage door. Oh, look at that. It's turning wide. Okay. So these people started saying, oh, I got this new feature. Let me take some video. And it's like, oh, that wasn't supposed to happen. You know, one of the cars you just saw there slammed into the side of his own garage door. Here it is. He's chasing his car down. He can't catch it. It's taking off without him. So there are some problems with this, aren't there? And quite frankly, all joking aside, I have a big problem with politically connected crony capitalists like Elon Musk and these other people getting a pass. And it's not just him. It's all these people who are involved in self-driving cars getting a pass to experiment on public roads. My family and I are not your guinea pigs. And every time I have Eric Peters on, we just marvel at how the entire purpose of the federal government's regulation up until the time that they decided they were going to kill gasoline engines because, you know, carbon stuff. Up until that point, everything that they were focused on was safety, safety, safety. And they've made the cars heavier and far, far, far more expensive and complex, making it more difficult for us to own them. That wouldn't be a plan, would it? But as they do all of that stuff, and that has been their focus, they just turn a blind eye to the blind eyes of these self-driving cars. As Eric Peters calls it, he says they are glaucomic. They can't see. If you or I had vision that bad, we'd have our driver's license taken away from us. And these smart summons features are kind of driving like very elderly drivers in Florida that I used to live with when I was growing up in Florida, who should have had their should have turned in their driver's license at that point. Consumer Reports is calling the feature glitchy and says that it is, quote, a science experiment. They said Smart Summon doesn't match up to the marketing hype. Imagine that. Elon Musk putting out something that doesn't match up to the hype. Who would have thought? Automation, they said, was glitchy. At times it worked intermittently without a lot of obvious benefits for consumers. Consumers are not getting fully tested consumer-ready technology, said Consumer Reports. Tesla owners are being enlisted as beta testers, even though they're paying $6,000 up front for the promised automation. Well, let me tell you something. Yeah, they're paying $6,000, and they're out there beta testing their stuff on the highways and in the parking lots and causing damage to their cars and to other people, putting other people at risk. And that's the problem that I have with it. I didn't sign up to be a part of their beta test. And the NTHSA is not doing anything to protect the public roads after they have told us, justified their existence for decades, to say that they're going to keep the roads safe. They are completely AWOL on all of this. So Consumer Reports took this, they put it in their controlled situation, in their controlled parking lot. They did not. Interestingly enough, Consumer Reports, unlike all the Tesla owners and Elon Musk, they had the consideration to not do their tests on a public road or public parking lot. They said the system's reliability only works, is the problem. It only works intermittently. They said the Model 3 that was using Smart Summon didn't always stay on its side of the lane in the parking lots either. They said in one case, a system worked in one section of a private lot, but in another part of the lot, it mistakenly detected that it was on a public road, and then it shut itself down. At various times, our Model 3 would suddenly stop for no obvious reason. In tests at one lot and at Consumer Reports Auto Test Center, the vehicle drove in the middle of the traffic lane, not on the side closer to the parked cars as a human driver would. And it would wander left and right as it drove, erratically, like a drunken or distracted driver. In other words, The Model 3 drove itself the wrong way on a one-way lane. Oh, sorry, in another instance, not in other words. But yeah, so it's veering all over the place like a drunk driver. It goes down the wrong way on a one-way lane. The tester had to run out to the car to move it to allow the traffic to begin flowing again after it stopped by thinking that it was in a public road because it's only supposed to operate in parking lots, and yet it is a danger even there. Eric Peters' characterization of it, he calls it the not-so-smart summoning, said the driverless Teslas are glaucomic, their hazy electronic eyes don't see cross-traffic in time, or they back into it. This is what we've seen from the multiple tests that have been put onto Twitter. They have very poor peripheral vision, and if we were dealing with a human driver, they would likely have their license revoked on the basis of not being able to pass a vision test. It used to be that the DMV failed drivers who couldn't back into or out of a parking lot without knocking over cones. But that was yesterday. When it comes to our new robot overlords and our technocratic elite crony capitalist overlords who will be selling that, well, not selling them, renting them eventually to us, we just look the other way, don't we? It's okay, says Eric Peters, to let a car back into other cars or into people, but we're not going to have anything done by our safety guardians in the federal government. And then above the safety issue is the legal issue. Who is going to be responsible for the damage caused by a glaucomic driverless Tesla, writes Eric Peters. If you are run over by one, do you sue the driver who summoned it, or do you sue the company, which knowingly put defective technology in its cars and then sold those cars to people and told those people it was safe to use? So is that going to be a lawsuit? Well, you're going to have to get in line because Elon Musk has got his pedo guy lawsuit going on. Hopefully there'll be some money left so that you can sue them after their car drives into you in the parking lot. And it's not just the smart summons feature. As Eric Peters points out, these other driver assists, which are on all of our cars. If you're buying any new cars, and it's one of the reasons why I haven't, I don't want to have a car that is going to counter steer, that is going to determine when it needs to brake and so forth. And as Eric Peters points out, as he tests cars, that's the other thing he does, is he doesn't just write about politics and freedom and how that intersects with cars, but he also drives them and tests them. He says, I've experienced this test driving new cars. I was driving one of these, a new Prius, with an automated emergency braking. When it applied the brakes full force for no apparent reason, I almost had the dashboard for lunch. There was no deer in the road. The car ahead of me had not braked, let alone stopped, but the Prius did, completely, in the middle of the road, which was thankfully not busy at the time. And thankfully, as he pointed out, he didn't have a large semi bearing down on him because they can't stop as quickly as a car. So that is a real issue. And it not only is going to slam on the brakes, but it's also going to cut your throttle. And finally, the point that Eric makes is that if it takes over control of your car, and he puts the "your" in air quotes here, if it takes over control of your car, do you really own your car? Control is how you define ownership, isn't it? And that's why I say, as they move to control our movement, as they move to control our speech, our communications, as they move to control our ability to shoot, have they taken ownership of us? Have they turned us into slaves? Oh, it is a full spectrum system of control, isn't it, that they have coming out? And I'm going to lay that out for you because Wired Magazine just put out an article this last Friday when I was gone, talking about how we're going to have the Airbnb of everything. Oh, that's a clever little way to sell the public on the idea that you will own absolutely nothing. You will be owned. That's another name for slavery. I don't know. Maybe they got the cart before the horse. We got the smart summons from Tesla, and it's just trying to... It's not relying on a map. It's got its vision and its thinking, and so it's just doing this on the fly. Except that it doesn't have very good peripheral vision. It's got very poor eyesight. and makes bad decisions, kind of drives erratically like a drunk driver and so forth, as they pointed out. So maybe that's not the approach that's going to work. So you got Uber and Waymo are mapping out city streets for their future self-driving fleet, which is not really that far away. Car and Driver reports that Uber and Waymo, of course, is Google's autonomous driving startup. Uber has gone to Dallas. They've got 2 SUVs that are going to be mapping out everything in Dallas in detail. And then Waymo is going to be using 3 vehicles in Los Angeles to map out everything in detail. So the Waymo mapping program will take a few months as 3 of the company's specially equipped Chrysler Pacifica minivans will collect data. They want to know the things like the exact height of a curb, the type of road surface, the locations of traffic lights. They said the things that our cars care about are quite different than someone trying to find their way via Google Maps or Waze. And, of course, I would interject in here that, for quite some time we had a lot of stories in the early days as Google Maps was still learning the ropes. I remember a particular situation where a couple was routed down a road where the bridge was out. But, you got to trust these. You got to trust Google, right? It would never be wrong. Your computer is never wrong. This is the mentality that if you got a printout, hey, that's it. I got a printout. And you don't ever ask, well, was the model correct? Did you put garbage in there? And did you get garbage out of it? So in that particular case, you had one that I remember. It was a couple, and the guy's driving down the road, and even though there were cones and signs up for him telling him the road was out, do not come down here, they went around the cones because why? Because their phone said so. And then the bridge was out. They went down, crashed the car into a ravine. It killed the driver. The wife survived. So she said, yeah, we just believed it. It was right there on the map. And so you're not even going to have a driver in these cars as they're putting them in there. They sent out a message, a TechCrunch, confirmed today that a notice went out to members of Waymo's early rider program. These are people who have been participating in company tests from the very beginning, and they get into these vehicles that, for the time being, have some backup drivers in them, but they have now Waymo has now sent out invitations to people. They're telling them that they're about to start offering autonomous rides with no backup driver. Said it's going to be happening in the Phoenix area. Oh, boy, that's great. It was in Arizona. I don't know if it was in Phoenix where we saw the one company. And again, I don't know if it was Uber or Lyft, but I think it was Uber. Remember that situation where it ran over the lady who was crossing the street? And at first the sheriff came out and said, well, it was that lady's fault because she was crossing the street there where there wasn't a street crossing. And they couldn't see him there. But then we got the footage. There was footage showing what was ahead, dash cam showing what was ahead, as well as a dash cam that was showing the human driver who was sitting there lulled into passivity on social media or playing a video game or something. And she was startled as she heard the thump-thump of the person that she just ran over. And the sheriff was saying, well, it's not her fault and it's not the car's fault. They just couldn't see it. And all these people who do this say, well, the car doesn't rely on visible light. It's got radar. It's supposed to pick that up. It didn't even slow down. So this is the world in which we are now finding ourselves. And as I look at this, and as I look at Uber and Waymo mapping out the city streets, what this really reminds me of, there's a Tesla driver fast asleep, filmed by other people who are not asleep, fortunately. But when I look at Uber and Waymo mapping out the streets for their future conquest, reminds me of the beginning of War of the Worlds. Remember how that began? Minds that are to our minds, as our minds are to those of the beasts who perish. Intellects, vast, cool, unsympathetic, regard our world with envious eyes, don't they? Slowly and surely, they draw their plans against us. And when H.G. Wells wrote that introduction to the War of the Worlds, he said in the early 20th century came the Great Disillusion. Well, it's the early 21st century that is going to become the Great Disillusion when people realize what the real purpose of this is. You know, we got people out there like Wahim Alvarez, who retweeted an article from Wired Magazine with the comments, and he's all about smart city, and he's, I think he's one of these people working with the Saudis to set up their smart city. But he puts himself out as director of smart city and digital innovation, a keynote speaker. This was sent to me by a listener. Thanks for forwarding this to me. He said, when he tweeted this out, he said, society turns its back on property, all uppercase, all exclamation marks. And this is exactly what these smart city mavens, these people who are mapping out our cities with envious eyes, and they want to destroy your world, and they want to lock you up in a prison that they own. And listen to how he puts this. Society turns its back on properties. Again, screaming that uppercase. Users of everything, nothing owners. That's exactly where they want you. But guess what? Somebody's going to own that stuff. It just ain't going to be you. And they're going to own you, is the bottom line. A change in the consumption habits, he says, of citizens is transforming the economy and business. Whether by necessity or by conviction, citizens relegate the acquisition of objects in favor of leasing services. Do you notice how he puts that over and over again? Not consumers, citizens. People are not choosing electric cars. Even with all the subsidies, they're still only 1% typically of what we see out there. And so the corporations and the governments are going to mandate this. So it isn't out of necessity or conviction. I would say it's out of either poverty or government mandates. And that's why this person, this smart city guy, is pitching this to governments, referring to these people as citizens. Just call them subjects, serfs, slaves. That's really how they see you. And if they can't make you poor enough to give you, to cut off your electricity like they're doing in California, oh, it's all about being sustainable. Let me tell you, this is about austerity. It is about sustainable tyranny. It is about sustainability in terms of dominance by a technocratic elite. That is what we're really looking at here. And so I'm going to give you an example when we come back of how these people see the future. Airbnb for everything. That is the age in which we're about to embark. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Yeah, as we look at the people who are selling us smart cities, and where did that come from again? Oh, that's right. It's from the United Nations. The same people who had an agenda for the drug war that they put through in 1961, 10 years before Richard Nixon copied it, put his name on the top of the homework and turned it in, called it his war on drugs. We've also had the UN Arms Trade Treaty to get the idea of universal background checks, universal gun registration. That's now being accomplished in other ways. Of course, we had the false flags, the gun walker programs under both George W. Bush and Obama. It blew up with Fast and Furious, but they still tried to keep that thing going. We've had other UN agendas as well, but we had Agenda 21 sometime in the 21st century because of, the environment thing. We're going to have to radically restrict people and lock them up in cities. And most of the earth is going to be off limits to those human beings who are kind of like a virus to Mother Earth. This wonderful, mysterious creature that was created by random chance, they tell us. And of course, we hear this narrative from Hollywood all the time. Mother Earth is angry. That's why we're having hurricanes and why we're having fires and why we're having hot weather or cold weather or fill in the blank. Mother Nature is angry, and you humans are like a virus. That's the old Gaia theory. James Lovelock, unfortunately for these people, has now completely repudiated the idea of man-made climate change. But nevertheless, they are still going to use that. And what the UN wants out of it is a global problem to assert a global solution via global government. And a key part of this, and you saw the old UN Agenda 21, you can see how they created megacities. You now got Francis Ford Coppola about to do a movie talking about how wonderful megacities are, to condition you for that. But it got more specific. They came up with UN 2030 agenda. They started calling it smart cities. So it's not any longer sometime in the 21st century. It's now by 2030. That's why all these people are panicking, because they're running out of time. They got to get us all locked up by 2030. And it just happens to coincide with the fourth turning. And so you have people like Joaquin Alvarez saying society has turned its back on property, either by necessity or by conviction. No, it's either by poverty or by mandate. He keeps talking about citizens because, of course, if you take the viewpoint of people actually exercising their choice as consumers, it's not going to work. They're going to hold a gun to your head. They're going to prohibit automobiles. They're going to shut down the manufacturing of gasoline. They're going to lock you up in the cities. They're going to take away your guns. They've already taken away much of our communication. And he goes on to say, forget the way that you have spent your money so far and reset. Things are no longer bought nor accumulated. Now they are rented, as and when one wants. Oh, really? You mean nobody owns this? Does this kind of sound like a Marxist-Leninist utopia? Nobody owns anything. Except how did that work out with communism and socialism? Well, you had the people who were at the top, the Politburo. It seems like they owned stuff. You could actually see it in Nicaragua, Venezuela. These people who have their kids who are multi-billionaires and are on social media with all of their hypercars and everything, they own stuff. Oh, they do. It's just the people who live in those countries don't own anything. But the Politburo, they own a lot. Look at communist China. Yeah, the people at the top, they seem to own everything, don't they? So it isn't like nobody owns anything. It isn't like we have all things in common and it's to each according to his need and from each according to his ability. No, it is a kleptocracy where these people have stolen everything from everyone else. They've turned everybody else into slaves, serfs, and people who don't own anything. That's another name for a slave or a serf. He goes on to say, governments cannot delay the regulation of the so-called platform economy any longer. So here's this guy, doesn't talk about consumers. He talks about citizens. He's making his appeal to government. Government, you have to do this. You have to regulate this. You've got to help us set up a platform economy. This is full-on fascism, folks. This is a merger of government with big corporations to control you and to own everything. And it is a form of Marxism. And it is being sold to us by the same people who are selling us this environmental panic, this alarmism. The new society, he says, of rent, subscription, and payment for access is already a part of a way of life for millions of people around the world, especially for the youngest. Yeah, they can't afford anything. As I was just saying, you've got a firm now pushing to the millennials because they're so cash-strapped. They can't find a job. They don't know anything. They don't have any skills. They've just been propagandized as part of this Marxist rework of our culture. They don't even know what gender they are, so they don't have any skills. And they're having to go to a firm and get a layaway payment plan to buy sneakers. So, yeah, of course they do rent everything. And so he puts in his tweet out here. He references the Wired magazine article, Welcome to the Age of Airbnb for Everything. And it starts talking about one particular lady who started Airbnb for boats. She calls it Boat Setter. Said she grew up in Lake Michigan. Her brothers had boats. They always had boats. They loved them, but they were whining to her about how expensive it was to keep up with the boats. And, yeah, we all know that anybody's had a boat, you know that it is a hole in the water that you pour your money into. But it can be a lot of fun. But everybody always complains about it when they have to spend money on it, of course. And so she looked at this and she said, well, maybe that would be a feature. Maybe we could take these boats and when we're not using them, we could rent them out. And so they start talking about the sublet economy. And that can be a good thing. If you own something and you got some downtime in your home or with your boat or other things like that, it's a great way to have some supplemental income. And we all need supplemental income because we're not seeing our real incomes grow like they used to grow. But then they go on to talk about all the different things that are being rented. Think about this. As Wired magazine says, the rental economy is everywhere and for everyone. Airbnb-style marketplace for cars, for garage storage, for private jets. That's called Jetly. You can rent someone's bed for a midday nap, or you can swim in somebody's pool. It's an app for that. It's called Swimply. And then it gets to the point where in San Francisco, where nobody can afford a home anymore because there's so many regulations on the homes. They're doing the same thing to homes that they've done to cars, that they're doing to their electrical infrastructure there, the grid infrastructure. Nobody can afford anything anymore because they've made everything so many mandates from the Democrats. So people are having a hard time affording a home in the Bay Area, so they came up with rent the backyard. And you can rent, you can sell your backyard space to people. Great, you know, that's nice if you can make a little bit of income there, but that's not where these people are going. As I just pointed out, Joaquin Alvarez and the Smart City crowd, they want to make sure that nobody owns anything, except them, of course, because somebody's going to own it. But it's going to be them, or it's going to be the government that's going to own it. And when I look at all this stuff, even to the extent that people feel that they're having so much trouble making their mortgage payment that they got to rent the backyard, and other people are so desperate because they live in an apartment and they can't get out anywhere that they would pay to rent the backyard. I'm reminded, you know, my father grew up in the Depression, and he was so poor, and he worked around the clock. I mean, he was working when he was 8 years old. They didn't have child labor laws there, and he had to work. Everybody in the family had to work, get any money that they could. And I remember the story, my mom telling me that my dad would pay kids to rent their bicycle for a little while. He'd give them cash after his job just so he could get on the bicycle and go a little ways. That, folks, is my definition of poverty. Great Depression poverty. And that's what they have in mind for us. We'll be right back. Welcome back, folks, as we look at the attempt to take away our ownership of anything, our ability to move, our ability to own firearms and shoot back, and, of course, our ability to communicate. They've come after that in a big way in the last couple of years. You've been very good to stand with us as we became the first target in the war against free speech. It's a war not only for your mind, but it is a war for the future, and it is already fully in force. You know, 9 months before they shut us down across the social media platforms and on YouTube, you had at the hearings, it didn't really get noticed except by the Socialist Workers' Party. They wrote an article about it. And you had an individual who was with the military-industrial complex, had been with the FBI and Homeland Security, had been in the military, and he was saying, we've got to silence the cannons on social media. We've got to enact full control. We need more control, not less. See, our government is not really approaching this any differently than the Chinese government is. They just want to make sure that they're the ones who get to call who gets censored and silenced. And this always happens. I mean, you go back to a century ago, as Woodrow Wilson was lying us into World War I. He'd said he wasn't going to get us into the war. And then, of course, you know, just like FDR later, you know, they both did get us into the war. But there was absolutely no justification, even attempted, really, for World War I. And yet it was a heavy campaign of propaganda that was conducted by Edward Bernays, the father of propaganda. Yeah, not Goebbels. Goebbels built on that foundation of Edward Bernays, who was working with Woodrow Wilson, and actually sending a film producer to jail, giving him 10 years in jail, a massive fine, completely ruined the guy's life. Why? Because he did a movie called The Spirit of 76, where he's talking about 1776. The British were the bad guys in that. That could not be allowed. They censored it. He put the stuff back in. Then they sent him to jail and took his money. And they said, you don't have any First Amendment rights when it comes to movies. Not if you want a war. And you don't have any First Amendment rights on social media. Not if they want to go to war with you and lock you up in the smart cities. And that's basically what we're looking at here. They want to control the election. They've got NewsGuard, and they're going to guard the news very carefully, make sure that you don't hear anything except what they want you to hear. That's a project of Microsoft and DARPA. They've also got a project to count the votes in case the NewsGuard doesn't work well enough. They can then count the votes. That's Election Guard. And so, folks, we're still here, and that's thanks to your support. I just want to remind you about some of the sales that we have right now. We have stepped up the sales. We now have 40 to 70% off dozens of products. We have the Everything Must Go emergency sale, making room in our warehouse for the end of the year. Of course, we have to pay inventory taxes here in Texas, so we make sure that we clear that out. But we also need to get this out of the way for new products. We've already sold out of some products like Vitamin Mineral Fusion and Pollen Block, and I hope we get Pollen Block back. That's the only thing my wife has found that really helps her sinuses. But and again, that's a very safe, natural product. But we're out of some of those products, and many others are clearing the shelves very quickly. Survival Shield X-Ray Nascent Iodine, 70% off. We have Vasobeat, one of our new products, 50% off. Krill oils and Ultimate Fish Oils, 25% off. And I've been taking krill oil. I've been taking Ultimate Fish Oil, and I didn't really feel anything. I took krill oil, and boy, that really, especially if you take it at night. Alex is right. I haven't seen Santa Claus yet, but I had some very vivid dreams. So I know that it's doing some good things for your brain, because you do need to have, you look at people who are suffering from Alzheimer's. If you put them on a high-fat diet, they start to get functionality back. A lot of the problems that I think that we're having, look at a lot of different things that may be exacerbating Alzheimer's. Certainly, people pointed to aluminum in products that we use and so forth. But I think also low-fat, no-fat diets have also taken a toll on people as well. So that's why I use the krill oil. Take a look at the products that we have at InfoWarsStore.com. We also have 50% off the rest of the products, pretty much, with free shipping and double Patriot points. Things like Brain Force Plus, Survival Shield X2 Nascent Iodine, Knockout, or All Natural Sleep Aid, many other products, InfoWarsStore.com. All right, let's take a look at what's going on with China here and the NBA stuff. I mean, their censorship really has been a slam dunk so far. Because, again, as we're going to see and are increasingly seeing with the smart cities, it's the cooperation, the partnership, the public-private partnership of giant corporations, multinational corporations, with authoritarian governments. I mean, we look at what is going on with Apple, for example. This morning, when I was getting coffee, Fox News was on, and you had these people talking about what was going on with Apple. Of course, Apple immediately shut down the emoji for Taiwan. Communist China, or fascist China, whatever you want to call them, under Xi Jinping, they have for the longest time wanted to pretend that Taiwan does not exist. They've hated Taiwan ever since they failed to capture it, Mao and the Communist Revolution. I remember when we were adopting from China, we had friends who were adopting from China. My friend's wife was from Taiwan. They mentioned that. They thought, oh, that'd be good. And the people who were with the Chinese adoption agency said, take that out of there. If they see that, they will blackball your adoption. They hate Taiwan so much. They want to purge every mention of Taiwan. And so obsessed are they with that. And really, when we look at the communist Chinese, they are more like the Nazis. Hitler did not shut down the private corporations. He wanted to control them. That's what these people in communist China are doing. And they are hyper-nationalist as well, just like the Nazis were. So they really, truly are fascists. And the people in Hong Kong know that. They called them Nazis more than communists. But they dictated to Apple, they said, we want you to remove the Taiwan flag emoji. They did that. And now, when you capitulate to these people, when you kowtow to them, they come back for more. So now they want Apple to take down an app that was being used in Hong Kong so people could see where the police were. They could share where the police were. And so these people on Fox News talking about that and saying, isn't this horrible that Apple is doing what China is doing? And they said, yeah, because the FBI wanted information off of phones and Apple wouldn't give it to them. And other police officers have complained that Waze is showing where police officers are parked. And so we need to be able to do that here in America. What's the matter with Apple? It's not a case of hypocrisy to them, right? As much as it is, yeah, we ought to get that same kind of control here in America. And it is coming to America because the conservatives, many of them, want the government to control this. It's just what we saw with the hearings that were being conducted in the wake of massive censorship against InfoWars. We were the first, at that time, we were the only people that had been purged. And little Marco Rubio chose not to have Alex. He pretended he didn't even know who Alex was when Alex went to the hearings anyway. He lied about that. He later admitted he lied about that. But he was telling these people, you're not going to do what China says, right? You're going to do what we say. Marco Rubio doesn't want free speech. Fox News doesn't want free speech. They want our government to act like the Chinese government. You have to understand. That's where we're headed. And they're bringing that to us. And so when you look at the NBA and you see that there's been fallout with this, Mark Cuban, who's got, as they point out, Washington Times, he's got an opinion about everything. He owns the Dallas Mavericks. You know, it was the Houston Rockets that started this whole back and forth with China. So he's got the Dallas Mavericks. So he's got an opinion on everything. He doesn't like college. He thinks NBA officiating stinks. He thinks that President Trump is awful and so forth. But if you ask him anything about this brouhaha going back and forth between the NBA and China, he doesn't have anything to say. Very silent about that. But some other owners are not. You know, we had another owner who decided that he would use it as an opportunity to criticize President Trump, not the Chinese government. That's Greg Popovich, who owns another Texas basketball team, the San Antonio Spurs. And then we see in 2 games in Philadelphia, the Sixers threw out some people there in Philadelphia. They held up a sign that said Free Hong Kong and another one that said Free HK. And they were thrown out of the game. And then just in case you think that that was an aberration, same thing happened again in Washington, D.C. The Washington Wizards were playing a game against the Luang Lions out of Guangzhou. And some people held up some Free Hong Kong signs, and they had them confiscated by security. We're now censoring free speech for the Chinese government here. And don't tell me they're not going to censor it for the American government when they demand it. They're already doing it. That's what happened at InfoWars here. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Hello, stupid Americans. Fentanyl, Chinese Communist Dragon here. I told you just a week ago, when you don't do what we say, you die. Look what happened to a Hong Kong protester. Oh, and don't forget, we killed more than Hitler ever did. And that's why the liberals love us. Oh. In America, the colleges that we fund teach no borders, no walls, no USA at all. Let me show you a trained slave. No wall, no USA at all. America is a rotting carcass covered in filthy maggots. Look at your own James Harden. He came out and apologized to us. That's good. And now we tell the NBA what to do, and the NBA say, yes, master.
Yeah, we apologize. We love China. We love, playing there.
Finally, you saw what happened to South Park. They talk about our re-education camps and our death camps and how Winnie the Pooh is banned. And let me now tell you what happens. They banned in our country. Then they put out sarcastic apology. That's not good enough. Once we take over, we're going to kill the South Park producers. That's what we do. Everyone is adopting our model. Big tech is censoring Alex Jones, and now even Republican leaders, and they do nothing. Soon, sites like Panda Video will be shut down. You stinking Americans, do not share that site or Infowars.com. Submit. Do not fight back. Do what I say. I just caught you, American. You visited Band.video. Oh, Mark Zuckerberg and others angry at you. Do what CNN says and do not visit Band.video or I have to hurt you.
And we're back, and that, of course, was one of our special reports. We now have the animated dragon back, Chinese dragon. I don't know who's doing that voice, though. Maybe you've got an idea. And as we're looking at this, we can kind of laugh at what's happening, but it's not really a joke. The way the companies are kowtowing to China because of their massive economic leverage, and it really only underscores how important it is for President Trump to start pulling this back. This has been going on for a very long time. Another example of this, Tiffany, I mentioned it briefly yesterday, but what it involves is just as we saw with President Xi being upset about Winnie the Pooh. Winnie the Pooh had to be purged everywhere. Why? Because somebody did a little meme, a cartoon, comparing him walking next to Obama being tall and thin, and he not being quite as tall, not quite as thin. So what they did was they showed Winnie the Pooh and Tigger walking. And so that made Xi furious. He purged it everywhere. Well, he kind of did the same thing with Tiffany's. You know, they've had a protest movement in Hong Kong after one individual was injured in the eye. They would have people wearing eye patches or covering one eye in solidarity with that person. Well, Tiffany had something that was totally unrelated. They had a lot of non-Asian actresses and so forth, and it was part of their I Spy ad. And because it was I Spy with my little eye, some kind of a trinket, you know, from Tiffany's jewelry. And the Chinese government, just like they did with Winnie the Pooh, had a problem with it, and so they pulled it. I just wonder how much longer it's going to be before Disney kills Winnie the Pooh. That actually was part of the South Park episode. After the guy goes to China and gets arrested, he smooths things over with the Chinese dictator by shooting and killing Winnie the Pooh. I wonder how much longer that's going to be before the Chinese government actually gets Disney to do that so that they can make some more films. We're going to be right back with Mark Hall. You're going to find this very interesting. Stay with us. Welcome back. Joining me now is Mark Hall. And of course, Mark is a documentary filmmaker. He's made films about a variety of subjects, a lot of them political, all over the world. I got to know Mark through a documentary that he did called Killing Ed. And it was initially a documentary about charter schools. And as a worst case example of how charter schools can go wrong, Mark started talking about the Gulen movement. And this is a movement now, last time we talked, Mark, they had about $750 million in terms of subsidies. Where are they now?
Well, they're approaching $1 billion in terms of taxpayer money that we're paying them and our property taxes to go to education. They operate currently about 173 charter schools here in the United States. And the charter schools fund a lot of different other organizations that are non-educational that I think most Americans would be very concerned about.
Yeah, and the thing is, you know, we look at this, and as somebody who supports freedom of thought and freedom of education, I was always sympathetic to charter schools. The problem is that in practice, what has happened with the charter schools is that they have been increasingly a product of big business, which doesn't really change the kinds of problems that I have with the government-mandated school, because they kind of go off the same type of curriculum that the federal government is forcing on everybody. But then there's this aspect of crony capitalism, this public-private partnership. It is when you have a merger of corporations and government, it's never a good thing. And when you looked at what was going on with the Gulen movement, and of course, this Fethullah Gulen coming from Turkey and protected from deportation by the CIA and so forth, this guy has schools not just in the United States, where he's getting nearly $1 billion worth of taxpayer money to run these schools, but he's running over 1,000 schools worldwide, and everywhere else they're Islamic madrasas. And he doesn't do that here, but there's a lot of other things that you uncovered in your documentary, Killing Ed. The FBI was investigating some of the fraud that was happening in some of these schools that they were setting up.
Well, Killing Ed is exactly that. It's an expose of this connection of a transnational Islamist, and I say Islamist meaning this is a politically motivated Islamic group. This Islamist group, a cult group, operating our charter schools, educating well over 80,000 kids in 26 or 27 different states here in the United States. There have been some schools outside of the United States that have been shut down after the 2016 coup attempt that took place in Turkey, which has been attributed by many academics to being fomented by the Gulen movement. And of course, as you say, Fethullah Gulen is protected by our government. He lives in harmony in a very beautiful compound in the Poconos of Pennsylvania. He goes to and fro, goes to New York.
Which you shot pictures of?
Absolutely. They were not happy when we rolled up and started asking questions. Yeah. And they're still not happy with me.
Absolutely. And they're not happy with me either for covering this, because I've also covered this stuff, and we had a situation. I don't do articles too often for InfoWars. As a matter of fact, it's probably the last time I did an article. I talked about the lawsuit that was being filed it's an international lawsuit. It was being backed up by the Turkish government with Erdogan against Fethullah Gulen, and I referenced your documentary, Killing Ed, and what was happening worldwide with the Gulen movement with their schools worldwide. And shortly after that, we got hacked, and they put up an article talking about a coup in Turkey, saying that Erdogan was fleeing, and it was my name that they put on there. And so the Gulenist, I think, hacked into that and said, yeah, we've taken over Turkey, and put that out there as kind of a thumbing their nose at both us and at Erdogan. And then that actually, there was a coup, whether it was a false flag coup or whether they were involved in it. But they have a lot of people in Turkey then high positions, the Gulenists did, judges, law enforcement, civil government. And so there was something of a civil war going on there. The two of them used to be allies, but then they developed a different vision for a worldwide caliphate. And of course, anybody that doesn't understand that Islam is both a religion and a political system, there is no separation of church and mosque.
Yeah.
Okay. They are unified always in their visions. It's just
I would say
brands.
You're absolutely accurate in that, this coup was a culmination of many years between 2013 and let's say 2016 of a soft civil war between Erdogan, who is the president of Turkey, and the Gulen movement led by Imam Fethullah Gulen in Pennsylvania. And the Gulen movement had infiltrated many areas of the Turkish government, the judiciary, the police force. Some would say they'd even infiltrated parts of the foreign ministry, their CIA, etc., and the military. So when the coup occurred, I remember I was in a studio editing up some footage with an editor, and it started coming through that there was this coup in Istanbul and people were being killed. And we were just thinking, this is probably Gulen's attempt at trying to become that person that leads Turkey and maybe reestablishes an Ottoman empire, an Ottomanist empire, because it's my opinion that he is neo-Ottomanist. I think that there's some that would say Erdogan is also someone that seeks to lead a bigger Turkey that's in charge of the Islamic world. And it's been interesting to observe because people like yourself have been hacked, or parents have been here in the United States have been scared to talk about it. It's really an interesting situation that this group has been growing in the United States rapidly, an Islamist group on our own tax dollars.
And we've got a lot of, as you point out in your documentary, a lot of Republicans and Democrats who are getting junkets to go and find out how wonderful Turkey is from the perspective of the Gulenists and so forth, right? And so we already are tightly linked to these individuals. And of course, Erdogan has not only got the competition with the Gulenists that are there, but he also has the PKK, a Marxist group that is ethnically Kurd. They are the largest ethnic minority in Turkey, 20%. And of course, the Kurds are the largest ethnic minority in Syria at 15%. And so this helps to explain why Erdogan, by the way, a member of NATO, I would explain to Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham loves NATO so much, except under certain circumstances here. But anyway, talk a little bit about what you know about the Kurds and that aspect of instability there in Turkey.
Well, if you listen to representatives of the Turkish government, they will tell you that Turkey has really been at war with certain parts of the Kurdish community in the Middle East. And as you say, the PKK is a group that they consider to be a terrorist organization. And so when you look at the recent military operations, which I think we have to be concerned about and keep under observation for it spilling out into other religious minorities and other minorities beyond the Kurds, you have to understand that the PKK it would be like Al-Qaeda sort of being on the Mexican border down south of San Diego and going in and blowing up buses in Sacramento. These are things that the PKK and their armed groups like the YPG, also another Kurdish group called the PYD, all Maoist-style communist revolutionary groups.
They even call the ones in Syria, the YPG, they even call themselves a People's Army or whatever.
Exactly.
And if you look at their flags, they're red. I mean,
yes,
these are Democrats.
Exactly. And so, they're a group that's bombed buses in Ankara. They've killed people within the Turkish border. And there's just a long history of animosity between these two groups. It doesn't mean that all Kurds, from what I gather, are subject to the heavy boot of the Turkish military right now. But I do think what they're trying to do is eradicate what they view as a very dangerous terrorist threat. The PKK has been on the NATO watch list for terrorism. It's on the U.S. watch list.
Oh, yeah, and the EU as well. We're going to be right back, and we're going to talk about what is happening with the Gulen movement in Alabama. These people who have nearly $1 billion worth of tax money, they're now moving in a big way into Alabama. Welcome back. We're talking to Mark Hall, and of course he did the documentary on probably the worst case example of what can go wrong with charter schools. And you really need to see this. It's Killing Ed. You can find it at killinged.com. You can find where you can watch the film. You can rent it, video on demand. You can rent it on Vimeo, Killing Ed. You can also find it on Amazon. You can get the DVD. And I guess if there's other ways that you can get that, you can also find out more about it at killinged.com. But at the center of all of this is Turkey and what is happening in Turkey. And as we were saying in the previous segment, Erdogan is very concerned about the Gulenist movement. Fethullah Gulen, the leader of that movement, is kind of a mystic, another sect of Islam. But everybody in Islam wants to have a political aspect as well as their different religious visions of what the religion is. But they always merge it with a political aspect. Now, that's true of both Erdogan and of Fethullah Gulen. And, of course, it's the same type of thing that we've seen in a broader way across the Middle East, where you've got the Sunnis and the Shias and the Wahhabists and Saudi Arabia, and they all hate each other quite a bit. And so that is another, even though they're Islamicists, they all have their own political and religious nuances, and they want to be the ones who are going to control the reconstituted Ottoman Empire. And, of course, when you mention that, that's their vision, to at least get back the Ottoman Empire if they don't get a worldwide caliphate. The Ottoman Empire breakup that happened about 100 years ago by the British is one of the reasons why we got the Kurds spread out with all these different countries that they arbitrarily set up. They are large ethnic minority in all these different countries and kind of a thorn in their side in all these different countries. And as we talked about, openly Marxist in most of these countries. The only one that wasn't identified as an only Kurd organization that wasn't openly Marxist and terrorist from that standpoint was a group of Iraqi Kurds, and the State Department said they're just organized crime. So these are the people that Lindsey Graham tells us we must have in order to have any security and safety in the United States.
Well, it makes you wonder why we would, use proxies like this, that are this bad, to go and fight in a situation where I can see the need to get rid of ISIL. But once we've kind of accomplished that, I think it's time for us to kind of get out of that area. It's not in our backyard. There's other people that are more familiar with it. We've left it a mess in many, many ways. And I think that someone like Lindsey Graham should not be proud of the fact that we've used very violent Marxist groups to affect our foreign policy.
Yeah, I think that his pal, John McCain, shouldn't have been posing with al-Nusra and al-Qaeda elements and helping to arm those people in Syria either. So let's move now from Syria to what's happening here in America. Because, again, what got you onto the Gulenist movement and what was happening in Turkey was this massive charter school movement that is getting nearly $1 billion here in the United States. That's what your documentary Killing Ed is about. And tell us, they began in a very, very heavy way in Texas. And that's where the vast majority of these schools are, and they've been welcomed with open arms by our lieutenant governor here, who, by the way, loves red flag gun laws and other things like that as well. But anyway, they were welcomed here in Texas and have quite a few schools here in Texas. And now they're making a move in a big way into Alabama. But they've been shut down in a couple of recent applications here in Texas. Tell us about that.
Sure. Well, the Gulen movement and the charter schools that they started to establish beginning in about 2000 really gained a lot of power here in Texas. They came in 2000. A man by the name of Soner Taram opened the first Harmony charter school in Houston at that time. Since that time, they've grown to about 56 campuses, Harmony campuses in the state. There's another 6 or 7 Gulen-related schools that go by the name of SST, School of Science and Technology. These schools here in here in Texas alone are getting in excess of $300 million of our tax money to operate the schools. And as we show in the film, we have former Gulenists, people that have left the movement, that inform us in the film that money, that those tax dollars are being skimmed in a number of different ways, in construction contracts with Gulen-related construction firms in Houston. And so there has
also the visa stuff too.
Oh,
because
yeah.
The H-1 visas that bring in people for service jobs in Disney, where Disney tells people you're all fired. If you want any severance pay, you're going to train your replacements from India. We're seeing this happen in a lot of different places, but it's a big part of these Gulen charter schools, where of course we don't have anybody here in America who can teach math or anything. So they bring
English
English, right? So we bring in somebody from Turkey to teach English to people.
Yeah.
And you had some whistleblowers in your film.
Absolutely.
Tell us what they said about that particular program.
Well, the H-1B visa program is flawed. I mean, it's really corrupt, just like so many other things in our country these days. How in the world could a Islamist group operate, almost 200 charter schools? Well, it happens in an America that's very corrupt here in the early 2000s. It's the only time I think we could see this because it's so absurd and strange. But as we show in Killing Ed, several of the men that we interviewed that had been with the Gulen movement, one of them lays out exactly how he came into the United States on an H-1B. It had all been arranged. He goes to the U.S. consul, I believe in Istanbul, gets his H-1B. He comes to a charter school in Ohio, thinking that he's going to be the IT person. He's going to fix computers. Instead, they put him in a classroom. Well, he's never taught at all in his life. His English skills are pretty limited. It's not what he was led to believe that he was going to be doing. But this goes on over and over and over. And what we found out in researching for the film is that there were well over 5,000 H-1Bs issued to Gulen-related charter schools and other entities in the United States over about a 10-year period.
And there are allegations of kickbacks with them.
Oh, absolutely.
They were paid quite a bit more than the American teachers were.
You're right, absolutely right, David. What would happen is it was understood that a Gulen movement follower of Imam Fethullah Gulen, when they came to the United States, they would have to be paid what the local salary would be. So let's say an English instructor here in Austin would get $40,000, according to the Department of Labor. Well, they would have to, the Gulen movement teacher on an H-1B would have to kick back up to 30% of their salary back to in cash every pay period to the Turkish administrators of the charter school. So this has gone on for way too long. People are starting to understand it a little bit better. I think a few people have seen Killing Ed at the Capitol here. I think a few have seen it in D.C. There's starting to be a sort of a pushback. And what we've seen here in Texas is that the Gulen movement tried to apply for a third charter in June of this year by Soner Taram, who had started Harmony. And he wasn't granted that charter. Now, that was a big surprise. No one thought that would happen. And it was denied him after he basically lied, or as one of the State Board of Education board members said, he had alternative facts about what the truth was regarding his application. So there's been some pushback. There's been a lot of pushback recently in Alabama. And I think the Gulen movement will continue to grow. And they desperately need to grow their charter schools in the United States because we are paying for their growth.
But in a situation where we're so politically corrupt and there's so much money involved here, I mean, tell us how much Senator Tarum makes just from one of the schools.
Well, he's recently opened a chaotic charter school in Alabama, in Montgomery, Alabama.
We'll be right back. Welcome back. We've been talking to Mark Hall, giving us a little bit of background on Turkey. Got into that because he started looking at charter school issues and found out about the Gulen movement that is getting nearly $1 billion now worth of federal, of taxpayer money. It's not just federal, it's across the country. Massive network of schools here in Texas. They started making their move into Alabama as well, but they've run into some snags in Alabama, haven't they?
They've really run into some problems there. And right before the break, you were asking me, about Senator Tarum, who is the founder of the Harmony Gulen chain here in Texas, 56 locations. Senator's being paid $30,000 a month for this one small school in Montgomery, Alabama.
Wow, that's like a Hunter Biden deal.
It's like a Hunter Biden deal. Maybe even better, because that's per location. He gets 15% of all inflows into that school. They've already had problems.
That's got to bother a lot of teachers out there to see somebody who is a teacher, who is an administrator of a charter school, getting paid $30,000 per month per location.
Exactly, and it's not that he's doing a stellar job. Teachers say he very rarely shows up on campus, maybe one day a week. He's trying to open up another school in southern Alabama. The community doesn't want it. This very rural, very small community is like, yeah, we just don't want our schools to be losing resources, which is what happens when charters come in. And in the same situation in Montgomery, Alabama, teachers have left. The school's only been open 6 weeks, but it's chaos. They don't have enough room for 70 elementary age kids. They don't have a single room to teach them at Lead Academy in Montgomery. So they have to go outside and teach them outside.
Well, you brought me an article here from the Alabama Reporter, and they're talking about that Lead Academy there in Montgomery. They said it was a chaotic mess. Tell us what happened there. The first 6 weeks, they were complaining about what had happened in that school.
Well, there's all kinds of complaints. There's no resources. There's utter chaos in terms of management. Senator Tarum has sold his services from a Houston-based company that seems to be a front for other Gulenists to provide services, curriculum, real estate, IT, all from Gulen-related companies. They're all supposed to be providing their expertise to this school. But it's in such sad shape that, within the matter of 4 or 5 weeks, principal's out. Who do they bring in to serve as an interim principal for a few weeks? A guy from Harmony, a Turkish Gulen follower, to serve as the interim principal.
So we've got this Turkish imam, protected by the CIA, comes here to America. He's getting $1 billion to have Turkish teachers running these charter schools here in America.
It's odd. I mean, I think I agree with you that it seems like our government is protecting this particular cult group from Turkey, a cult group that tried to overthrow the existing government. Whatever you may think of Erdogan, that man has been elected 4 different times democratically. And so what is it what's our real interest here? We have to ask ourselves, why is our government, whether it's the CIA, the State Department, or the FBI, why are they providing such cover to a group that is doing such harm to us?
And I have to ask, why are we going through this kind of corruption that we see in these charter schools? Because it's not just the Gulenists. You're talking about IDEA, which is another charter school organization. Tell us about the connection with Beto O'Rourke and IDEA.
It's really interesting. When I heard this story, I thought, this is really odd, but I have it on very good information, several different sources that Beto O'Rourke's wife, who had established a charter school in El Paso, Texas, where they live, she had arranged for the financing of an additional large number of charter schools to be operated by a charter operator called IDEA from the Rio Grande Valley of Texas. I believe IDEA received about $200 million, and they're so flush with cash now that they fly their executives first class, and they're looking for a private jet to buy.
Oh, well, so they didn't have a shortage of private jet pilots.
That's where our tax dollars are going.
That's great. Well, see, that's the kind of corruption that we see. And I understand the impetus with charter schools. I understand that there are some independent charter schools that people have put together. The problem is that when you go to the government to get a subsidy for something that you want to do, there's an inherently corrupting thing that happens with that. And that's why we've had these types of discussions with homeschooling groups that I've been involved with. And my advice to them was always, do not take any government money. You take government money, they're going to control you. If you take it because you want to have intramural sports or whatever for your homeschool group, they're going to use that to control you. And the same thing is true of the charter schools. We need to cut off the government. And if we can't do that with our own children's education and start taking control of it, because ultimately it goes back to, you have to understand that how vital the education of your children is. If you want them to be able to think freely and independently, if you want them to have your values, you have to understand that there is no such thing as a secular education. That is it's just whose values are going to be taught. What religion are you going to be teaching people? What culture are you going to teach them? And it goes to those essential ingredients, but it's really the corruption that we're talking about here. And the fact that even when you bring in government to do something that you agree is something that needs to be done, like education, they corrupt it. And we see that in health as well. We're looking at the FDA. It's the corruption between the FDA and the pharmaceutical companies. Again, we could start by saying, well, there's no authority for the federal government to be involved in education. There's no authority for the federal government to be involved in telling us what food and what drugs we should have. That's something that could and should be done at the local level. They pull this kind of stuff in like they did with GMOs because they were losing. The big corporations, the big multinationals were losing at the local level. So they said, well, let's go to, we don't want a patchwork quilt of regulations, so let's just shut this all down from Washington. And that's the way these guys operate. So they've shut down stem cell use of your own fat cells. You went down to Panama, and I really want to talk to you about that because I have a couple of different family members that were in the process of using their own stem cells, and that got just arbitrarily shut down by the FDA usurping authority that it had never claimed it had before, and saying you're not going to do that and you're not going to be able to store that. Tell us a little bit about what you saw down in Panama.
Well, you've been a really strong voice about the use of stem cells as an emerging way of curing disease in our country. Not just
covering it up.
Not just a palliative to cover up the illness, that pharmaceuticals generally offer us. And, I was very interested in some of the things you've said about your own family's issues with the U.S. government. I spent about a year researching stem cells for my mother, who is in her late 70s. She has some issues with her eyes, some other autoimmune issues. And, what we found is that stem cells would probably help her in many ways, but hopefully reduce the problems with her eyesight. There was no other known treatment for the genetic disorder that she has. And we ended up going to Panama for treatment. Now, why Panama? Well, there seems to be only 4 nations in the world, that doesn't include the United States, but 4 nations in the world that offer this type of treatment where they use mesenchymal stem cells that are taken from the umbilical cords of born babies postnatally. Mm-hmm. They take those cells, they grow them in a bioreactor. The doctors in Panama that operate the Stem Cell Institute there, they're all U.S. trained, and actually one of the founders is a U.S. doctor who couldn't do his treatments and applied research here in the United States. So I took my mother down there recently, and after 3 days of intravenous stem cell treatment, we were starting to see some pretty amazing changes in her strength, some clarity of her vision clearing up a little bit. We know that it may take up to 10 weeks or so before we see.
We're going to talk about that more when we come back. We got a hard break here, and this is the same clinic that Mel Gibson took his father to.
That's right.
Correct? All right, we're going to be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. I want to get into this right away. We're talking to Mark Hall. We've been talking to him about the charter school issues, about what's going on with Turkey, the big footprint here in Turkey within our charter schools. But Mark also has had some experience with stem cells. And when we're talking about the charter school issue, the central part of that is the corruption that has come along with the government involvement. And that is also, I believe, the central aspect of what is happening now with the stem cell treatments that have been prohibited. I had an interview a couple of times with Lori Gregory of Mom Street Journal. She was helping Kristen Camilla, who was fighting the federal government and trying to shut down the process that she was doing. My family was involved in that as well. Using your own fat cells to, you extract some fat cells, you put them in a centrifuge, you extract the stem cells, and then you inject the stem cells that you've removed from your own body back into your body. And the FDA says, no, you can't do that. Now, how in the world does the FDA have jurisdiction over that? That's your own cells. And if, as I've said many times, if they're going to stop that, they have to stop Joe Biden from getting his hair transplants. They have to stop the in vitro fertilization, which I hope they don't do, and the storage of embryos, because they've now shut down the storage of these fat stem cells and so forth. I did an interview with that. You can still find that, by the way, if you search for it on YouTube. YouTube hasn't associated that with me too strongly yet, so they haven't purged that. Anything that I have gets purged, but it's still up on somebody else's site, and I'll be linking to that before too much longer. Want to have it up, but let's talk a little bit about the other types of stem cells, because one of the things that a lot of people have been concerned about, we know that stem cells taken from aborted babies have been something that the partners of the FDA are looking at. They want to take the stem cells from aborted babies and they want to patent them. And that's really what I think the end game on all this stuff is with the FDA. And that's my personal opinion. That's what I think that they're doing, is they're going to suddenly see the light as to how effective these things are once they can use the patented stem cells that Big Pharmaceutical makes from aborted babies. But there is a third alternative, which you took your mom to down in Panama, which is not your own stem cells exclusively, or do they use their own stem cells?
No, no.
So it's not your stem cells. It's not the stem cells of aborted babies. These stem cells come from the umbilical cord of babies post-birth.
Yes.
And they cultivate those.
That's
and
correct.
then use that to treat people. So tell us how this worked out for your mom.
Worked out really well. There are very few side effects from this treatment. It's biologic. It's not like a pharmaceutical. You can't get too much of this and have an overdose or have an allergy.
And that's the key thing, too, because when we're talking about this, the FDA has never said they had the authority to regulate any biologics. That was another aspect of it.
Well, and I think the controversy was generated, about a generation ago with fetal stem cells, and those are still problematic. There, I would imagine, there's a lot of pharmaceutical research in it, but most of the people that I've talked to that have experience in stem cells say you don't want to deal with those embryonic stem cells anyway. They see that they cause cancer for some reason. So they're focusing on 3 different types of stem cells. So
it's important that we make a distinction, because most of the people that I talk to, when they hear stem cells, they think aborted babies.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we need to distinguish that. And so there are, as you say, there are fat-based adipose stem cells that we can take from our body, spin down, take those stem cells and put them into joints, into our back, other places that need some additional healing strength. That's what stem cells do. As we age, we don't have as many of those stem cells. And it's really part of the regenerative process of our bodies. If we don't have those cells.
It's a big factor for osteoarthritis, arthritis that comes with old age, but also for rheumatoid arthritis.
Sure.
They had a lot of success with, you said, with multiple sclerosis. They were curing it down there in Panama?
In Panama, it seems that they are curing, this is amazing. They are curing people, apparently, of MS. And I've met people who had to retire. I met a gentleman who was a football coach in Ennis, Texas. He was in his 50s. He had such bad MS, he could not get onto the field and talk to his players. He had to retire, and he heard about mesenchymal stem cells. And I guess after about 2 years of treatment, you wouldn't know that he has MS.
Wow.
I mean, he can walk. He doesn't need a cane even.
And see, that's what got the FDA after Kristen Camilla, because she was so enthusiastic about this. She was saying, look at this. We've got 80% cure on this and 85% cure on that. Looking at things like autism and other issues, like you can't say that, so they came after her for that as well. I think it's one of the reasons why they came after her.
Well, and it's pretty amazing. I mean, so there's the adipose stem cells. There are these mesenchymal stem cells, which is what they're using in Panama, which are umbilical stem cells. They're not your own. So the FDA really has a problem with this.
Well, they have a problem if you use your own as well.
Well, they do. If they're, as I understand it, David, they have a real problem if they are manipulated. So there
Putting them
are
in a centrifuge. That's too much.
Well, it seems like there's changing. And I'm not a doctor, and I don't deal in this. I've just been observing it, and I appreciate your strong words on the need for this, because I think so many people in our country could benefit from this. But
It's a misplaced paternalism. But let's understand that at the bottom of this, it's about corruption.
It seems
really
like it, yeah.
It's about usurpation of authority, and the purpose of it is corruption for big pharmaceutical companies. I've seen it too many times. I'm absolutely convinced of it. There's absolutely no authority for them, in my opinion, for the FDA to even exist, let alone for them to extend it into biologics, to extend it into cells taken from your own body and then put back into your own body to actually cure it. But tell us about your mom. How has she been doing after this?
She's doing very well, and we're starting to see, some things that are giving her additional strength. Stomach issues that she's had for a while now are resolving themselves. She's reporting that she can see a little bit better, less cloudy. We will know after about 10 weeks, so we still have some time to see what the final results of this will be. But she told me the other day that she thought, just alone from what she's seen, it was worth it to her. Her issues were not as chronic as somebody that has acute autism or has MS or some of the other things that they're treating there. But in terms of what her needs were and sort of slowing down this genetic blindness, it's our hope that will happen. She saw very few side effects. She had some flu and cold symptoms on the second day of treatment. Those resolved themselves. She had some pain because she's got some rheumatoid arthritis. And what these mesenchymal stem cells do is go after inflamed areas of your body. So if you have arthritis, they're going to go and try to repair those areas of your body that are the most inflamed, and then go after other things afterwards. So, but in terms of it being something like major surgery or pharmaceutical dosages or those things that can really, really damage our cellular structure, leave us weakened, I didn't see anything like that at all. And I think she's far better off after having 3 of these injections over a 1-week period than anything else she's tried in recent years.
And that's great to hear. And of course, Mel Gibson went on with Joe Rogan, talked about his father who was elderly, and just they said, well, there's really not much we can do for him because all these different aspects of his body are just wearing out. Took him down there on a stretcher, and you know about that.
To Panama, right?
Yeah,
Took him down. Hatton came down, as I understand it, in a wheelchair. They treated him. The Mayo Clinic had said, hey, Mel Gibson, take your dad home because he's not going to make it. Well, Hatton just celebrated his 100th birthday. He had those treatments 8 years ago.
Yeah, he took him down there on a stretcher, and after he was there for a few days, he walked out on his own power.
There's all kinds of people that are going to this little clinic in Panama. It's a very well-run clinic. But you see people from Amsterdam, from India, from the Channel Islands in England, of course, from the United States.
This is what infuriates me, is that this would be kept from us by our government.
Yeah, it's infuriating.
They have absolutely no authority to keep this from us. If it is, we've already had, as a matter of fact, Kristen Camilla treated over 6,000 people and didn't have any serious side effects with any of this stuff, and had some very good positive effects, but that's what they keep from us. Thank you so much, Mark, and of course you can find Mark's documentary, again, Killing Ed, killinged.com. You can stream it off of video on demand, Vimeo video on demand, and you can also buy the DVD on Amazon. And folks, if you want to keep us here, make sure you take a look at the sales that we have at InfoWarsStore.com. We've got a We've had the 50% off, free shipping, and double Patriot points on the natural nutraceuticals that we sell. You know, we just don't understand how effective and safe natural ingredients can be. Just like we're talking about using your own cells. We just had the story that was up on Drudge Report for a day, talking about how lycopene that was concentrated, lycopene, which is in tomatoes, gives them the red color. They would concentrate that, and that would bring up the sperm count of individuals. Pollen block that we have, that has been amazing for my wife, and that is just quail eggs, essentially. And so there's many safe and natural ingredients. When we look at bodies, that's a natural anti-inflammatory ingredients. So take a look at the products that we have at InfoWarsStore.com. 50% off all the InfoWars Life products. Some of them we've discounted all the way up to 70%. Free shipping, double Patriot points, InfoWarsStore.com.